What a weekend it was in the AFC North. All the teams in the division making moves. And for the Ravens, the moves from their division foes both helped and hurt them. We talk about what moves were made, Marlon Humphrey giving his offseason plans for the Ravens, and so much more coming up next on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms, including in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel, and in audio form where you can follow along and subscribe as well. 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens content. So every Monday through Friday, we have you covered. And then we also have some bonus episodes. Sometimes on the weekends, we go live after every single Ravens game, after every single Ravens piece of big news as well. So tell a friend, tell a family member, we are here for them. We're here for you as well on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. It is free agency day, at least for the legal tampering period. 12 p.m., it all kicks off. But we've already had a flurry of moves in the NFL, particularly in the AFC North. The AFC North making headlines a lot over the past 48 hours, 72 hours, and especially yesterday, where we saw the Browns go out there and re-sign Myles Garrett. That was a huge twist in that situation. The Steelers going and getting a star wide receiver to help out whoever the quarterback is there. Who knows who it is? But for the Ravens, they even got into the action on Saturday. They re-signed Ronnie Stanley. We did a live reaction to that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that whole situation as well, because there are a lot of different factors for Baltimore that, you know, kind of have a domino effect based off of that signing. We also did live on that. So if you want to go back and watch our instant reaction or listen to that instant reaction, we have that available as well. And the Bengals, they did re-sign Mike Gesicki to a big deal, but there are a lot of questions right now. So I kind of want to do I guess a state of the AFC North based off all the moves that have happened, because really all four teams, and even throughout the league, it's not even an AFC North thing. There have been a lot of guys who have moved teams recently. So we'll dive into that. Marlon Humphrey over the weekend gave his take on the Ravens offseason plans that he would like to see happen. So we'll talk about Marlon's offseason checklist for Baltimore, and then we'll get into some final free agency talk for the Ravens, who they should sign, what their approach should be, and just kind of revisiting some of the conversations we've had and go in depth after we know some of how the landscape has shaken out so far. So AFC North, I mentioned the two moves from yesterday, Myles Garrett and DK Metcalf as the star receiver the Steelers ended up trading for. Let's start with the Metcalf move, because I think that was the most recent one, first of all. And I think that, again, kind of shocking to a lot of people, the Steelers did make this move. They pair up DK Metcalf with George Pickens, and the Steelers ended up trading a second-round pick for DK. And they, on top of it, gave him an $150 million deal. 5 years, $150 million. Now, we talked about it on Locked On Ravens, right? DK was a guy that I thought that if the Ravens were to make a big wide receiver trade, DK would be awesome. Obviously, they weren't going to give him $150 million, right? Even if you want to talk about the capital that the Steelers gave up, second-round pick, the Ravens, on top of that, were not going to give up that big contract, because we had talked about how DK wanted that $30 million per season and what that would look like. If DK was going to cost you an opportunity to sign Kyle Hamilton, sign Tyler Linderbaum, Zay Flowers, you know, some of those other guys you have to figure out what you're going to do with, that would not have been worth it, especially on top of the draft capital that Baltimore would have had to give up in that moment as well. So, I mean, to me, I think that for the Ravens and the whole situation, look, they're going to have to go up against DK twice a year. He's now a new foe in the AFC North, and, you know, kind of has some questions about whether Russell Wilson will be back. He and DK obviously have connections from their days in Seattle. Definitely a shocking move. I think, honestly, it was a decently good move for the Steelers. Now, that money that's tied up into DK is going to not have the ability for them to go out there and sign some other free agents that they might need to. But it also depends on the structure of the contract, too. At the time of this recording, those numbers haven't come out yet. So if that year one cap hit is lower, then they might still have opportunities. But you look at Baltimore and who they have in their secondary. Yeah, if George Pickens stays long-term with Pittsburgh, then Pickens and Metcalf is a very good duo. It's a great duo, honestly. But then in the Ravens secondary, you have Marlon Humphrey, Nate Wiggins, Kyle Hamilton. You have options there. So I think that for the Ravens, they have the guys to match up with the Steelers, and we'll see who else they add. Obviously, Pittsburgh still has Calvin Austin as well, Pat Freiermuth, etc. But this move, in my opinion, did make Pittsburgh better. It's just a matter of can they keep continuing to get better, and it all honestly falls down to who the quarterback is. It boils down to that. Because if it is Russell Wilson, I would love that. Because Russ did not have a good year for Pittsburgh last season, especially down the stretch. I know he had his moments, but if I'm the Ravens and they re-sign Russell Wilson, I'm licking my chops. I'm saying, man, that's opportunity. Russ, he has those great stretches, at least, especially the last couple seasons, has great stretches, but then it all kind of seems to fall apart for him. And look, his days in Seattle, that's not who he's been in Denver and in Pittsburgh. We can all acknowledge that. So, yeah, you can have the best wide receivers on the planet, but if the guy can't get you the ball, he's throwing it to you, that's a problem. So I think that for Baltimore, the move for DK technically hurts them in terms of Pittsburgh getting better, right? This does make Pittsburgh better. But as I said, I think the Ravens do have the horses to stop Pittsburgh's offense, especially even when Arthur Smith is the play caller there. He didn't really show me a lot in year one in Pittsburgh there as well. Now, I think the Browns actually helped out the Ravens with the Myles Garrett re-signing. For those who didn't know about that situation, Myles Garrett made it very clear that he wanted out of Cleveland, wanted to win a championship, didn't think Cleveland was the place for him. Well, Cleveland, they made a very compelling offer in terms of dollar bills. Money certainly spoke to Myles Garrett. $40 million per season, and includes $123.5 million in guaranteed money. Absolutely insane contract. Insane. And this is a deal for Baltimore where, you might be thinking, what do you mean Myles Garrett staying in the AFC North? It's not good for the Ravens. Well, as a lot of people have pointed out on social media, it's been kind of the big talking point, especially from a Ravens perspective. Myles Garrett on the Browns is a lot less of a threat than Myles Garrett on a Super Bowl contender. Let's say the Bills traded for him. Let's say the 49ers traded for him, or the Rams, or the Eagles, or the Lions, or the Commanders. The list goes on and on and on. A Super Bowl contender that could get in Baltimore's way. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm not really scared of the Browns, right? I know, hot take here. I am not scared of the Cleveland Browns, even with Myles Garrett. They have to prove it to me. The Browns have been offseason champs for what, like 10 years at this point now in a row? They've been offseason champs. What have they done every single season? They've done nothing. Playing Myles Garrett twice a season on the Browns, I would much rather have than him have gone to a Super Bowl contender, and especially even in the AFC, and Baltimore having to face him in the playoffs there. Now, if the Browns do become a contender and they make all these good moves around Myles Garrett, then okay, it's a different conversation. But Cleveland has to prove it first. They have to prove it that they can do that consistently. And I just don't know what the plan is for the Browns now, because obviously you can't move forward with Deshaun Watson. You do have the second pick, and you can make something happen with that, but I just don't know what they want to do. Because yes, Myles Garrett, if you want to win a championship, Myles Garrett, very important piece. But I think Cleveland actually did Baltimore a favor here, and I'm very happy with the news that he is not going to a Buffalo, not going to a Philadelphia or Detroit, where if Baltimore had to see a team like that in the playoffs, it's a lot more difficult with Myles Garrett there, because we know how good of a player he is, but still playing him twice a year in the AFC North, not necessarily all that fun. But which team did these moves have the most impact on? It was the Bengals. The Bengals signed Mike Gesicki to a decently big tight end contract, but Trey Hendrickson is disgruntled. T. Higgins is disgruntled. Jamar Chase is disgruntled. And the Bengals have dug in over, $1 million. And I saw on social media, Jake Lisco, the host of Locked On Bengals, said, dig in over $1 million today and lose $5 million tomorrow. And we see, 150 for DK Metcalf, Myles Garrett with all that money and guarantees for an edge rusher. Well, the price of Trey Hendrickson and T. Higgins just went up. And with the Bengals and their reputation of being a cheap franchise in terms of, spending and this, that, and the other, not great. And for the Ravens, that's music to their ears. It's music to mine. I would love Trey Hendrickson to be out of this division. I would love T. Higgins to be out of this division. I don't think they let Jamar Chase go, but they could go 1 for 3 here, and that's really bad, especially with how much Joe Burrow has lobbied for the Bengals to keep all these guys. And, they keep Mike Gesicki, who, great. I mean, I think personally it was a little bit of an overpay, but this Bengals team, that offense is awesome, but, T. Higgins is part of what makes that offense great. And I also think when you talk about the defense, the Bengals defense was awful. I was on this show all year talking about how terrible that Bengals defense was. Trey Hendrickson was the lone bright spot on that defense. He's incredible. He's given the Ravens issues. To me, I think that Baltimore here are really big winners in at least 2 of these 3 situations, not even to mention their own, which I think they're a big winner of them re-signing Ronnie Stanley, solidifying that offensive line, keeping him away from their rivals like a Kansas City. We'll get into that a little bit in the second part of the show. I want to kind of dedicate a little more time to that there. But Baltimore, yes, DK's a really talented player. Myles Garrett, incredible player there. But it's almost like in Pittsburgh, who's throwing DK the ball? In Cleveland, are they ever competing for a championship? In Cincinnati, just feels like it's in shambles right now. So, look, the Ravens have had a weird offseason with a lot of things going on, and we certainly talked about those as everything has come out. But I think that after this weekend, and even in the NFL, I thought Devontae Adams signing with the Rams, great move for the Rams. Errol Landry going to the Patriots. There are a bunch of other moves that happened as well, just because there's so many guys who have been cut and they can sign elsewhere immediately, veterans. They don't have to wait for that tampering period. I think that Baltimore came out on top in the AFC North. I think that the Ravens were winners. The Ravens were the winners of this big AFC North arms race, I guess, over the weekend, if you wanted to call it that. Ronnie Stanley, DK Metcalf, Mike Gesicki, and Myles Garrett. All 4 of those guys. Ronnie Stanley might not be the best player there out of those 4, but I think that with his impact on the Ravens offensive line and with the question marks surrounding these other teams here, we'll see how the rest of the offseason unfolds. Obviously, again, free agency starts up at 12 p.m. Eastern here. So if you're listening to this after that, maybe a team has made a big move and we have a different conversation. But for now, I think that Baltimore is the AFC North winner of the weekend. Coming up, we will talk a little bit about Ronnie Stanley. We'll also dive into Marlon Humphrey giving his take on what he thinks the Ravens should do this offseason. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today, an expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return. All you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find your every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Back here on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Monday. Happy free agency day. This is always so exciting for me. This is my favorite time, or at least one of my favorite times of the year. Even when you talk about the season, I love the season. I love when football's on. That is my favorite time, obviously. But free agency, you get to make moves, make your team better. 12 p.m. Eastern, the legal tampering period starts. Obviously, Wednesdays when the new league year officially begins. But moves already being made. We talked about a lot of them in the first part of the show, and one that was big for the Ravens over the weekend, the big domino was Ronnie Stanley. Ravens re-signing him to a 3-year, $60 million deal, $44 million of that guaranteed. We did a live show on that for Instant Reaction on Saturday. I was not in Baltimore this past weekend. I was down in Sarasota doing some Orioles coverage, so we had a green screen. It was still my background, but I had the green screen up from it. It was a really good time, a really awesome live stream, and we'll even do live streams for moves the Ravens make, big moves they make. So excited to kind of get into those live streams a little bit more as the free agency moves hopefully flurry in for the Ravens over the course of the next handful of days, maybe even handful of weeks. But Stanley's a guy that the Ravens did need back. And I don't mean that in terms of they would have been, there was no option to replace him if he had left, but he was clearly the best offensive lineman on the free agent market. The continuity he has had in Baltimore, particularly with Lamar Jackson, is invaluable. And I think that after betting on himself in 2024, chopping off that last year of his contract and everything, he showed that he might not be the Ronnie Stanley before the injury, peak of his powers Ronnie Stanley. But as I've said, if he can be 80% of that, you take that 10 times out of 10, 100 times out of 100. And Ronnie is a veteran in that room. He is the veteran in that room, for being honest. Young room, Ronnie Stanley gives that stable veteran calming presence. So I think the Ravens, yes, maybe it was a little bit more than people anticipated, especially because I do think, look, Ronnie gave them a hometown discount to stay. It's pretty apparent. And I know there are rumblings and reports that the Ravens did have to up their offer over the last couple of days to secure him back with the Ravens. I think it's worth it because if he had hit the open market, he would have probably gotten $25 million per season. The Chiefs, the Patriots, there were multiple other interested teams too. Really felt like if he hit free agency, he was as good as gone. So this deal needed to be done before today. It is. Ronnie's back with Baltimore, and now they don't have to feel like they need to maybe scramble in the draft to go get another tackle option or move Roger Rosengarten over to the left side. They now have that freedom, and this is how they've operated anyway. We talked about that on Saturday, but they don't have to say, okay, we really like this corner or we really like this wide receiver, whatever position it is, but we really need a tackle, so we're going to take that guy instead. You don't want to reach for a player if the positional need is there. You don't want to panic yourself, and Baltimore does a good job of not doing that, but I think to me, Stanley being back gives them that flexibility, not only in the draft, but in free agency as well. So the time of this recording, I still don't believe we have the full structure details. Of course, the $44 million guaranteed is one of those structure details, but in terms of how the money is broken down year after year. So, we'll see and we'll figure it out. But I'm excited that Ronnie's back in Baltimore. I think that this was the move that everybody was waiting for. A lot of people, their offseason was like, okay, if the Ravens re-sign Ronnie Stanley, that's a good start. Still more needs to be done. Obviously the guard position, Andrew Voorhees and Daniel Falele are their two projected starters there. But I think that Stanley being back is a good first step. Now, Marlon Humphrey gave his thoughts on the Ravens offseason. He gave a little rundown checklist here, and I want to read it off because I think a lot of people had some thoughts and some comments on what he had to say. So first of all, he said, re-sign Ronnie. This was before that happened. So step one of Marlon's offseason plan is complete. He said, re-sign Ronnie, B. Steve, and a few others. Devontae probably pricey, so realistically, Coop is wide receiver 3. If cut price makes sense, boom. I don't know Judon's market, but boom. Draft best available cornerback or pass rusher with first 2 picks. Later rounds, find a guy that just loves football. And he did make it clear in a follow-up that it's his thoughts, not the Ravens. So don't, it's not coming from Baltimore. This is just what Marlon wants the Ravens to do, or at least his offseason thoughts on the Ravens. So I think a lot of people were lost on the B. Steve thing, right? Now, Brandon Stevens is Marlon's teammate. He's in that corner room with him. Doesn't shock me Marlon said that. Obviously, if you've been listening to me on Locked On Ravens, you know my opinion on Brandon Stevens, which falls in line with, I think, a lot of others, which is I don't want him back with the team. I think the Ravens can upgrade there, and his weaknesses last season and honestly over the course of his career have not gotten better. He had a great year in 2023. We can all acknowledge that, but him not being able to locate the ball consistently over the course of his career, that being a problem for him, yeah, you need someone who can do that. You cannot have someone be picked on the way Brandon Stevens was picked on in 2024. So I understand, I get it why Marlon put him on his list, but I have to disagree with Marlon on that one. I do not think Brandon Stevens should come back, especially with the contract he's probably going to get, which might be a little more than people are anticipating. If Brandon Stevens came back on a minimum or close to it to be like the fourth corner, then fine. I'm okay with that. But if you're re-signing him to start again and it's a decently big contract, I just think there are better ways to spend that money. Like, I just think there are. Now, he hit it on the head, too. We'll do another check here. Davante Adams was pricey. He went to the Rams, 2-year deal. It was a pricey contract. So he said, realistically, Coop is wide receiver 3. So I believe he means Amari Cooper because he said if Kupp's price makes sense, boom. So, either one, Amari Cooper, Cooper Kupp, you can even throw guys like DeAndre Hopkins, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen. Wide receiver 3 is it's not a sneaky need because everybody knows the Ravens need one, but I feel like everybody's talking about pass rusher and corner, which again, they're bigger needs than wide receiver is right now. Doesn't mean the Ravens don't need a wide receiver. They do. Now, do they need a number 1? Did they need to trade for DK? No, they didn't need to do that. But having a guy that can take pressure off of Zay and Rashod is a really, really big deal. So I think a wide receiver 3, really big for them. Matthew Judon, of course, Marlon wants them to be in that market. He and Judon obviously are very close. You got a bunch of other former Ravens being cut. Zadarius Smith, a recent example. Gus Edwards, a recent example. So, yeah, I have a feeling, and this is a prediction. We'll talk more about predictions coming up just in a minute in the final part of the show. But I feel like the Ravens are going to get back at least one of their former guys, at least one. Darius does make sense with the pass rusher need if you want to go there. 9 sacks last season. Gus, not so much, but they have other guys who have been released, have been cut. I feel like the Ravens re-signed one of their former players, and we'll see. Like, that's a prediction I feel pretty strongly about. Who knows if it comes true or not, but if it is Judon, Marlon Humphrey going to be a very, very happy person. Now, with the draft, best available corner, pass rusher with first 2 picks, later rounds, find a guy that just loves football. Yeah, I mean, pass rusher probably makes the most sense. Corner, safety, wide receiver, I'm not really going. Maybe it's guard, right? Tyler Booker is a popular option. If he ends up falling, that could be something that the Ravens would explore. That the Ravens have a lot of options in the draft. And again, Ronnie not being someone you have to worry about re-signing anymore, that does give you that flexibility. So GM Humphrey is in the building. We'll see how accurate his predictions end up being. But so far, he's actually 2 for 2. So still a chance the Marlon Humphrey offseason works out in his favor. Coming up in the final part of the show, we'll do a final free agency talk. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on, and the FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly, no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Back here on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. We're here in video form. We're here in audio form. We're here for you 5 days per week, every single week on Locked On Ravens. So again, tell a friend, tell a family member, join the community. We've built up such amazing communities, video form, audio form, social media, Twitter at CashRecord34, Instagram at CashRecord34, and even on subtext as well. I absolutely love it. The support's been amazing, and I can't thank everybody enough for it. But I wanted to do a mock draft Sunday. There was so much that happened in the NFL yesterday. Like, literally, it seemed like every hour another huge move was coming. Even like every 30 minutes, it felt like at times. And I felt like with the way that free agency happened, especially with the AFC North moves, I felt like it was better to focus not on a mock draft for today, but just some final free agency talk before we have free agency start at 12 p.m. here. So if you're listening after the fact, you probably know where guys have signed or intend to sign. But here's the thing for the Ravens. the biggest domino has fallen. I've been repeating that all show. What that means for the rest of the dominoes, it doesn't really mean as much. I mean, I feel like Patrick McCarry's probably gone. Brandon Stevens, we talked about, he's probably gone. I feel like Patrick Ricard does resign. That's the other, not as big as the other three, but still a very vital, important piece of that offense. But other than that, I mean, do you re-sign a Tylan Wallace? Feels like that could be an option. Malik Harrison, Chris Board, or Darius Washington feels like another guy. Maybe they try to sign an extension with, although he had some cryptic posts on social media yesterday, which might not have, he might not have been happy with the Ravens' offer, maybe similar to Odafe Owe. But in terms of who they could potentially sign, yes, some guys are off the board, like Devontae Adams, Harold Landry, etc. But that doesn't mean that there isn't anybody available for the Ravens to get. Now, with the Ronnie move, if he wasn't available to sign and he went somewhere else, well, then you have more money to spend. But the Ravens still have to make some cap moves. They can still restructure, cut, extend certain guys. And, I think we'll see some of that. I mean, look, Marcus Williams is gone. They're going to free up that money that way, et cetera, et cetera. But I feel like a guy that has a decent shot at becoming a Raven here decently soon, Darius Slay, feels like he could be a Raven. My prediction is that it's he and DeAndre Hopkins that sign with the Ravens, wide receiver 3, corner. And then other than that, I'm not really sure they make a ton of other moves. I mean, obviously moves around the margins here, but we have to remember the Ravens are not a team that just dives in head first on the first day of free agency every season, right? They don't have the cap space to do that. And they just like to see how the market plays out, right? Maybe a guy's asking price is a little too rich for them at the moment. And they say, hey, you know what? Go out there, see if you can find that number. If you don't, you want to lower that a little bit, come back to us, and we can try to work something out. And sometimes a guy does find that number. Other times they don't, and they do come back to the Ravens and something works out. But this is an offseason where you don't have a laundry list of free agents. You're able to improve your roster while not losing a ton of talent. And that, to me, is a really big, important piece of this equation. So the Ravens right now are in a position to compete for a Super Bowl in 2025. We all know that, especially with Lamar Jackson, with Derrick Henry, with a lot of the stars they have on defense, et cetera. I think they've made good moves so far, right? Ronnie being the big one, coaching staff, those are also moves I think they've done a really good job with. But now this is the time to continue to supplement your roster with talented players. You don't have to go in there and bring in 5 stars. The Ravens don't need that. But talented players that can go get the job done for you, that's really, really good. Because what it means is that, again, you take pressure off of guys. Yes, Zay Flowers and Rashod Bateman, they can handle wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 duties. But if it's not them or if someone gets injured, then you're in a pretty big pickle if you can't have another guy behind them that can step up and make an impact. And we saw that with Zay when he wasn't available. He got injured in week 18. When he wasn't available, the Ravens had an issue there. So it's about building depth up. Baltimore generally does a really good job at doing that. And I'm really excited to see how it all plays out. Honestly, just across the league in general, too. I mean, again, Baltimore, to me, was the big AFC North winner of the weekend, and they didn't make the biggest move of the weekend. That, to me, kind of shows the circumstances of the moves and where Baltimore is as a team right now. They freed up a lot of flexibility. I think that they'll be a team that is able to do some damage this offseason in a good way. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in to the show. We'll be back here. We might do a live later today, depending on what happens on day 1 of free agency, but if not, we'll be back here tomorrow. We'll be breaking down everything that happened, who signed where, Ravens players signing, leaving. Of course, if there is a big signing, we will go live for it on Locked On Ravens. So be sure to like and subscribe in video form, follow along in audio form for 5 days a week of daily Ravens coverage. Tell a friend, tell a family member. I'll see you right back here soon on Locked On Ravens.